Greetings and welcome. My name is Narisa Rashid, and I'm the host of today's ASQ Lean Enterprise Division webinar. We hold these webinars once each month, and they are free to all our members. Our webinars are recorded, so previous webinars are available on the ASQ Lean Enterprise Division YouTube channel. Our topic for next month is Understanding Toyota Kata, and the presenter is Leanne Schillmeyer. Our topic for today, December 11th, is why trust is so important and how to build it with lean management. And the presenter is David Hinds. David is an entrepreneur, educator, author, and is passionate about the value of and importance of lean management. He brings a truly unique perspective to its understanding, teaching, and application, and has developed and taught an MBA course in lean entrepreneurship. David continues to teach his MBA course and is an active corporate trainer. He's a frequent speaker and an advisor to the service industry on the application of lean methods, culture, and leadership. And he's working on a new book entitled Leading with Trust, a practical guide to lean empowerment. Some logistics. Everyone will be on mute, but you're free to post questions to the presenter, David Hinds, as you think of them. David has reserved about 10 minutes at the end to answer your questions, and we will take one at a time. And here's David.
Okay, thanks so much, Narisa. Again, my name is David Hinds, and I want to welcome everybody to this webinar. The webinar is about trust, and it's about lean management. So again, thanks, Narisa. I also want to thank Hank Zarnicki and Frank Murdoch for your support in helping getting this all set up. And I especially want to thank all of you who are attending. I know everybody's busy, and I really appreciate your time, and I'll do my best to make the most of it. I'm sure most of you are from ASQ, but some of you I know are from the general business community, maybe not as familiar with ASQ. And so in the presentation, I will attempt to kind of speak to both audiences and hopefully make some connections there. But for those that are not familiar with ASQ, just to let you know, it is a really terrific organization, provides education, professional certification, and also is kind of the platform for a community of people that are all interested in, quality and the improvement of quality. So today's webinar, I'm going to go into 3 areas. I'm going to start out talking about trust, basically what is it and why it is so valuable. Then I'm going to talk about empowerment and some practical issues as far as how empowerment can be used to build trust in an organization. And then lastly, I'm going to get specifically into lean management practices and show how those can be used and are used to build trust in organizations. So before we get started, I have a couple of poll questions. I think we're going to do this first poll question here. And let me just go ahead and read out the question, and then Narisa is going to post the question, and I'd like everybody attending to respond with their answer. So the question is, think of all the leaders within your work environment. Of those individuals, what percentage of them do you trust to consider your personal well-being and development when they're making decisions? And there's 4 responses there. So Narisa, if you can open that up, and if everybody could go ahead and respond. Is it 0 to 25%, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, or 75 to 100? Just check one of those that you think is your percentage that you trust.
David, do I wait for 100% voters, or when do I stop the collection?
Yeah, if you got a good response, let's see what it shows like.
We have 75% right now going up. So 1 minute time should be enough.
Last chance, everyone. Go ahead, we can show the results.
Are you able to see the results actually?
Screen share. All right, do you have the results, Nariz? I don't see them.
Oh,
Maybe you can
okay.
just read them off to us.
Yeah. 0 to 25%, we have 41%.
Okay.
And the second range, 26 to 50%, we have 32% poll.
Okay.
From 51 to 75, we have 23%. I can share my screen if you want, but
That's okay. Go ahead. Just finish that.
yeah. And 51 to 75%, we have 23%
Mhm.
response. And 76 to 100%, we have 4% response.
4%. Okay, very interesting. So basically, in that high quartile, those that really trust most of their leaders, we have only 4% of respondees. That's kind of interesting. 41% of the respondees are in the lowest category. Think less than a quarter of their leaders consider their personal well-being and development, and the rest are in the middle. So I'm not surprised. This is relatively typical of what we see. All right. Now I'm going to show the other poll question. I think we have some technical difficulties with it, so we're not going to actually hold the poll, but I do want to read it out because I'm going to talk about this. But now instead of thinking of leaders, we're talking about peers and subordinates. And the question was going to be about to what extent do you trust your peers and subordinates to be competent and reliable in carrying out their job responsibilities? And we might see a similar response. Generally, I think we might see a little bit of a higher trust level in that. But the one thing I wanted to comment on these two questions, they really represent the two different types of trust. There really are two different types of trust. The first type relates to the first poll question, and that is we often call opportunistic trust. What that means is, do you trust somebody's intentions? You know, do they have your well-being in mind, or are they doing things behind your back? Are they maybe doing nefarious things that you would not consider appropriate? The other kind of trust is trust called competence trust, and that's where you're looking to say trust the ability or reliability of somebody else. And these two are pretty much independent. You know, you can trust someone's ability, but not at all trust their intentions, and vice versa. Some people, hey, I completely trust their intentions, but they're not so able to do their job. Okay, so when we talk about trust, really both of those ideas tend to be kind of conflated. And I think we generally are talking more about opportunistic trust, like do we trust people's intention? But I think it's important to recognize both of those are part of what we consider to be trust. Now, as I move through the webinar, I just wanted to give a little brief background because I'm really bringing two different perspectives here, and I'm going to try to keep them straight and hopefully not be too confusing, but I'm kind of wearing two hats. You know, one hat is as a process improvement professional, based mostly in the last 10 years of my career, where I have been researching and teaching Lean in the MBA program, supervising a few hundred Lean improvement projects by students, and also working a lot with Lean organizations as partners and clients. So that's kind of my process improvement perspective. My management perspective really comes prior to the last 10 years when I was the owner and CEO of a mid-sized wholesale distribution company, and I did hold some executive and manager positions in a couple of other industries. So I do bring those two hats. Again, I'll try to keep it clear, you know, from which hat I'm holding at any given time. So let's talk about the management perspective. Management cares about trust, or if they don't, they should. In a 2016 survey by Price Waterhouse, they do a global survey of thousands of CEOs, and they found that 58% of CEOs believe that a lack of trust was a threat to their organization's growth. And what's interesting is that this is up from, I think it's 37%. I can't quite see the slide there. It's up from 37% just 3 years earlier. So trust is a big, prominent issue, and it's really growing rapidly in importance. Now here, we're really talking about trust in the organization, both internally from employees, for example, and also externally. To what extent do customers trust an organization? To what extent do their partners, the community in general, trust an organization? Now, the next bullet down really talks to, and this is what our webinar is about, trust within the organization, the trust level within the people that work in the organization. And here, Paul Zak has done some really interesting work. I'm going to refer to him a little bit later in the webinar, but here I'm going to talk about the results he's found in comparing people who are employed at high trust companies versus low trust companies. And he's found those that work in high trust companies where there's a lot of trust in the organization have basically double the energy at work. They're a great deal more engaged. They have a lot less stress, 50% higher productivity. They're more satisfied with their lives. I put the little picture of the aspirin there because I sometimes look at trust as kind of this amazing drug that has multiple benefits, just like, you know, aspirin reduces fever and is anticoagulant and so forth. So, and I want to focus in on the engagement, 76% more engagement, because CEOs and management are also very interested in engagement and engaged workers. Gallup, in fact, spends a great deal of time and effort in tracking through surveys the percentage of engaged workers. Right now, we're in the US, we're running at about 1/3 of workers consider themselves engaged, and 2/3 consider themselves disengaged, meaning they don't really care a whole lot about their work. So there's a lot of work to be done there, but engaged workers, once you have them and can develop them, they're productive, they're more productive, they're innovative, they're proud of their company, proud of what they do. They tend to be loyal and retain with the company. They're focused in their work. They can be very effective recruiters of new talent. You know, there's just a lot of ways in which trust just has very, very positive effects on an organization. Now, if you look at the process improvement side, that perspective, lean professionals care about trust, or they should, but I know they do. We often say it in terms of respect for people, right? That a pillar of lean management, lean manufacturing, is respect for people, and that's certainly true. But what I found is that it's really trust is kind of this active ingredient of lean management, okay? And I'm going to talk about the relationship between respect and trust in just a little bit, but if you think about it, you know, we know that to really understand a process, to approve it, you have to really understand it, and you're not going to understand it unless you've got a good level of open and trusting communication so you can see what's going on in a process. Trust frees up the workers to admit and expose faults so they can be addressed, and they can do that without fearing there's going to be retribution or blaming of some sort. And lastly, trust is needed to limit resistance to change. You know, process improvement is change, and as we all know, resistance is very common. So the more trust there is, the better chance of facilitating acceptance and sustaining the improvements that are made. I mean, the bottom line is basically, you know, lack of trust makes our job a lot more difficult in the process improvement world. Okay, so what I'm showing you here, I'm really introducing this. It's a organizational trust assessment tool or instrument, which I developed based on an adaptation of work in by Stephen M.R. Covey in his great book, The Speed of Trust. Now, Stephen M.R. is actually the son of the Stephen Covey that I'm sure many of you know. And the son is now, I believe, running the organization, very involved in that. And the idea here is to have a tool that lets you understand, at least get a first cut look at where your organization stands as far as, is it more of a low trust culture and how bad it is, or is it more in the center, or is it more of a high trust culture? Now, I often think of trust as being kind of a virus that can spread, so it's, even though you'll have pockets and individuals might trust each other more or less in an organization, but generally there's a cultural feature to it. And if you think of trust as a virus, the leaders really are the carriers. So if they carry a low trust virus, they're likely to infect the organization. You'll see low trust tend to spread throughout and become part of the culture. Same with a high trust. So you can see there's some different levels here, and I'll go into those in just a second. But if you go to the bottom, where the bottom row where it says effect on performance, and the fifth column over, which is level 5, which says trust not an issue at the top. So go to the bottom of that column, you see 0% baseline. So basically, this is an organization where trust is really not an issue. It's really not high trust, really not low trust. We've kind of set that, or Covey has set that as the 0 point. Now, if you can move that organization higher and turn it into a high trust organization, you can increase performance by 20 to 40%. Now, performance can be based in various ways depending on how you measure it, but I think you get the idea. It's just, overall impact on, could be productivity, profit, revenue, whatever. As you go lower from level 5, so there's quite a bit of downside going into trust issues, down all the way down to level 1, non-existent trust, you might actually reduce your performance by 20, 40, 60, even 80%. So if you look at that very lowest level where there's basically non-existent trust, the far left column, you're essentially running at 20% of your capability, if you will, to perform. And if you could take that organization and move it all the way to a world-class level, level 7, you'd be at 140% of your baseline capability. That's a 7-fold increase, 7 times the amount of performance. So I would suggest, this tool is available. I think it's already available for download off of the webinar. We'll talk about it a little bit at the end, but I would encourage you to use it. You can use it in various ways, but it's important to get a sense for where you are. We'll talk about that a little more later on, of how it might affect process improvement decisions, but even just general management. Where are you on this? How much more performance could you get from a higher trust culture? How much performance are you leaving on the table by not addressing trust in your organization? Now, I'm going to dig in a little further here. I've pulled out 3 of the columns just so we can take a closer look at it. Just to see, the differences from low to high trust. You can see there's 4 dimensions. These are dimensions that I created to kind of organize this into an instrument. And you have working atmosphere, personal relationships, management style, and policies and procedures. So at the top, working atmosphere. This is kind of what you could probably walk in the door in many organizations and within a matter of a few hours or a day or so, feel it. Okay, you could feel if it's very low trust, toxic environment. I'm reading off that cell. Open warfare, sabotage, grievances, lawsuits, criminal behavior. Pretty bad. If you move up to level 4, better, but still some trust issues. All right, you might see some grumbling, some dissatisfied employees, but nothing horrible. But you go all the way up to level 7, world-class trust. You see this high level of engagement. People are innovative, they're confident, they're loyal, they're proud. So you can really feel the difference because it is a cultural kind of thing. The next row down, personal relationships. Now here, you might need to spend a little time so you can begin to see the relationships, but again, very low trust, level 1, highly dysfunctional relationships, sometimes verbal, emotional, physical abuse. Move into the center. There's some tension, some misunderstandings, hard to grow relationships, but you can. And then on the high end, amazing energy created by relationships, true joy characterized by caring and love. Is this really possible? Well, we're going to talk about that. Management style, low end tends to be dominated by micromanagement, overbearing, gridlock decision making. In the middle, there's some complaining, not so bad. In the high end, very positive, high level of transparency. And the last row, policies and procedures. Low trust tends to be characterized by very redundant bureaucracies, a lot of controls, excessive controls, all the way up to fully aligned systems and structures. Now, one of the things that really comes across in Covey's book that I think is just don't appreciate unless you think about is how costly it is to have low trust. And it comes in the form of controls and bureaucracy. And I know it's not in an organization, but I think the TSA is a very good example. For those of us who were around before the TSA, getting on an airplane was really quite simple, right? You didn't have all of that cost and effort and time and waiting. And unfortunately, now we do. Why is that? Why are we spending all that money and all that time and effort? Because we don't trust. That's why. Because we don't trust. And you find the same type of thing inside organizations. When you don't have a lot of trust, you have to add in controls and bureaucracy, and these are costly. So at this point, you're probably saying, or I'm sure many of you are saying, this is great, but this stuff is not easy. And it's not. I've been there. I understand that. And I want to thank Chad and his colleagues for sending 2 questions to me ahead of time to address. And I appreciate it because these are really common questions that are key and can be an obstacle to trying to build trust. The first question is, how do you trust people who you believe are not trustworthy? That's a good question. Secondly, how do you rebuild trust in a situation where trust has been lost? Well, to address these questions, I'm going to take us all back. Let's go back in time to 1982 to Fremont, California. And this is where General Motors had a plant, manufacturing plant, who was actually the poster child for low trust organizations. The UAW, United Auto Workers, stated that the employees of this plant were the worst workforce in the entire US automobile industry. They were known for wildcat strikes, high levels of absenteeism, drinking alcohol on the job, frequent sabotage. There were reports that they would take Coke cans and put them in the door panels of new cars so that when the owner bought the car, they were, totally irritated by this rattling going on. So, and not surprisingly, the quality of the autos produced at that plant was the lowest among all General Motors plants. Well, about that time, Toyota was interested in setting up manufacturing in the United States. They did not have any at the time. And at the same time, General Motors, who was making mostly gas guzzling cars at the time, was trying to make small cars, but really wanted to learn how to efficiently make small cars, and Toyota was very good at that. So General Motors and Toyota created a joint venture called NUMMI, New United Motor Manufacturing Incorporated. And it was to be located at that Fremont plant and staffed mostly by those original General Motors workers. So you can imagine there had to be quite a bit of anxiety, quite a bit of questions about whether this was a good idea. Not just because of the state of those GM workers, that this was the worst workforce, also issues of here comes Toyota, a Japanese company, can these Japanese ways work in the US? Isn't Japanese culture different than US culture, and so forth. So again, prior to starting the venture, the plant produced the lowest quality GM cars and had the worst workforce issues. 20% absenteeism. 1 out of 5 workers were absent on any given day. They could barely set up their production lines. Within 1 year of starting the joint venture, performance and quality had totally turned around. They went from producing the worst General Motors cars to producing the highest quality General Motors cars of any plant in the United States. Their absenteeism dropped from 20% to 2%, and it stayed there. So this is really startling result, and the obvious question is, how did they do it? Well, and this is a story that I know, many or most ASQ members know, but it's worth repeating. And of course, for those that are not familiar with this, the quick answer is NUMMI. How did this happen? NUMMI deployed the Toyota production system. That was Toyota's not just production, but really also a management system that they had developed mostly after World War II. At the time, though, back in the 1980s, it wasn't well known in the US. And since then, it has become quite well known in the manufacturing industry. It's come to really dominate manufacturing, not just in the United States, but throughout the world, and has moved into other service industries, but still not entirely well known. We now call this, for the most part, lean management. But that's kind of the easy answer. What really was different here, okay? And this is from John Shook. You see the reference there at the top. John was a key player and lived through the whole NUMMI experience, and he, reported what he's has seen. And of course, John is now a very, very prominent person in the lean profession. So in addressing those cultural problems, what NUMMI did was really interesting. They took the approach of trying to change what people do rather than trying to change how people think. And this is really important to understand because, a lot of the cultural change literature and trust building and how do you do it talk to changing your attitude, changing how you treat people, and so forth. But as John has said there, the quote is, "It's easier to act your way to a new way of thinking than to think your way to a new way of acting." So that's how they did it. And we'll kind of go into some of the specifics, but these new ways of doing that they brought in are really part of these lean management practices. And I think the best single concept and word to describe them would be empowerment, because that's what it's really all about. It's really about empowerment. So empowerment builds trust. How is that? Well, in general, empowerment, you can define it as a management approach in which leaders share power with subordinates and other employees. And sharing power is a significant show of respect. So think about that. If I'm going to share power with you, I'm showing you my respect that I'm willing to do that. And if you accept the power that I'm sharing, you're also showing respect to me. You might say, I don't really respect you. I don't really want to deal with you. So it really is a show of respect in both directions. And research has shown that respect builds trust. I like to say respect is the soil in which trust can grow. In a work context, I think we all have a general idea what respect means, but I think a good way of thinking about it, respect is basically treating people as human beings rather than cogs in a machine. So this is really not rocket science, but it actually is neuroscience. So one of the other amazing things that Paul Zak did, I mentioned him earlier, is that he actually conducted neurologic studies, brain scans, and he found that when we feel respected, that stimulus, that acts like a stimulus that releases oxytocin in your brain. And of course, oxytocin is one of those feel-good chemicals. And it seems to create the feeling of trust towards who is respecting you. So this is a really amazing discovery that he's found, and he's repeated this over and over again, actually in many different cultures around the world. And that is the basis for this idea that respect builds trust. Now, how about lean management? Well, lean management is actually a system of empowerment, a system. It includes various practices which work together as a system to build trust by offering many opportunities for respectful interaction, okay, between and among leaders and associates. Now, this is another key aspect of trust building is interaction. You know, we really, and again, based on research and common sense, that, you know, coming together, you know, does build trust. If you work together, you're going to build trust. If you're working separately, you often build suspicion. But, you know, just bringing people together and having them interact is not a guarantee. Understood. Early on, for people that have not been interacting in the past, conflict is inevitable. But the key is keeping that conflict respectful. So here's one point at which it's important to know where you stand as an organization in terms of low trust or high trust. Because if you're quite low trust culture, impairment can be dangerous. It can actually backfire. And I'll talk about this more in a little bit. Now, the lean management system is important because it provides not just a system, it's a structure that shows you how to share power, how to do it in the right way, while you still maintaining oversight, proper oversight and risk management. Absolutely critical in an organization. So I'm going to go into these practices in just a minute here, and as I go through them, it'll be a chance for those that are not so familiar with this to see some of the lean practices. But for ASQ members that you know live this day in, day out, I'm going to try to show how these practices can be more or less effective in building trust. Sometimes you can kill trust with some of these practices. So I will try to point those out as we go through. Now, here are the 8 lean practices, at least the way I've presented them. And those of you who are in management, you know, may say, well, you know, I understand these, I do these. But what's unique about, and I'm sure you do, but what's unique here is that these form a system and that there's a certain way of approaching these. So I'm going to try to make that clear as we go through. So the first practice, develop people. Employees are trained and developed to maximize their chance of succeeding. A couple of things I want to point out here. When I say the word employees, I really mean everybody working in the company, whether they're leaders or associates. You might call those managers and subordinates or leaders and followers, but employees means everybody. So for trust building, the develop people practice, the key there is to train all employees in waste finding and waste elimination skills. I'll talk in a little bit about just how valuable what this waste finding and elimination is as empowerment. You can see a picture there. That's a little card I use in some of my workshops. So everybody, after being trained, can carry it to see what are the different waste types, what are the signals to look for, examples, and so forth. Other forms of training need to be provided, especially for supervisors, people that have direct supervision in terms of coaching. We're going to talk about coaching in a minute. But this is an area that is commonly requires work. And so make sure you have to pay attention to that in terms of training. Just a warning, try not to be too selective or exclusionary in who can attend training, even if it's management training. Somebody wants to join and you can make that work. Why not? That's the best way to build trust. Second practice is partner in work. Employees, again, everyone, leaders, associates, work together as partners. Now, for trust building, the absolute critical practice here is to hold the daily stand-up meetings with all employees. Generally 10 minutes in the morning, could be plus or minus. Of course, in large, you don't want these meetings to be more than, say, 30, 40 people. So in a large organization, there may be many, many of these meetings in different work groups. But this is really the heartbeat of the lean system, okay? This is a great point of interaction because, even though people work in the same office, doesn't mean that they're really interacting in a meaningful way. This has everybody together. You're all focused on similar ideas. You can be talking about waste, talking about what happened yesterday, what's going on today. It's just what I find to be a critical practice for building trust. Best to keep employees informed about overall organizational goals, strategies, and so forth, which can be done in this meeting or maybe in other situations. You really have to be careful about being too worried about need to know. The idea of, only releasing information, need to know, I've been there. I know it can be easier for a manager or an executive in one respect, than not share too much, but that really can kill trust, so I would encourage, management to be biased towards openness. It doesn't mean you release everything, but you have to question yourself, why am I holding this back? There may be good reasons, but maybe there's not. And if you're an advisor to one of those persons, then encourage them to release as much as they can. This is a common problem among organizations. The third practice is coaching associates. Here, leaders coach associates at the place of work. And mostly this applies to direct supervisors. So for trust building, supervisors conduct daily Gemba walks. Gemba is the word we use for the place of work. So this is the supervisor going out to where the work is done, not bringing people into their office, and coaching their associates as opposed to directing them. Now, when I hold workshop sessions and so forth, I have 3 ground rules that I always try to implement as people try to implement lean systems. First one is to managers to say, don't micromanage, ask questions, okay? Because it's very common for people to want to micromanage. You see right below that, Fujio Cho, who's Toyota chairman, I guess he's honorary now, his famous quote was about these Gemba walks: go see, ask why, show respect. And I would add kind of a rest of the story to that is go see, ask why, show respect, and build trust, because that's what you're really doing here. You do have to be aware that, asking questions and basically being in this teaching learning situation takes time. And you can't be too focused on immediate results at the expense of learning. Now, there are times when you have to move forward with something that has an immediacy to it. But if you're doing that all the time, it's a problem. So take the time to teach and learn is the second ground rule that I always follow. And at the bottom, part of coaching, sometimes part of other events. Another area that many companies don't do a good job at is don't forget to recognize and celebrate excellence. And when you do it, make sure you're fair, okay? If you're recognizing somebody, promoting somebody, it should be done based on their performance and their respect by their peers and subordinates and leaders. It should not be done because they're somebody's friend and they didn't really deserve it. So fairness is very important. Recognition can be a negative on trust if it's not done fairly. Establish goals. Leaders set and communicate actionable goals. The key word here is actionable, because again, we're trying to support empowerment and trust building. And the goals that are established, it's critical that you provide that direction to the people you're trying to empower so they know where to go. And if you look at the first element there, establish and clearly communicate the organization's promise to customers in a small number of goal statements. So why is that so important? Well, if you step back a second, I think it's fair to say lean management is really about fulfilling that customer promise with the least possible resources. That's pretty much it. And that's the idea of waste, by the way. I mean, waste is anything that's not fulfilling those customer promises, which we call delivering value. So if employees are going to be looking for waste and eliminating it, they have to understand the promise to customers if they're going to understand what is waste. On the right, I've shown, just as an example, of the 3 promises that we made in my wholesale distribution company. Provide consistent and reliable service, ship at least 98% of orders complete and on time, and be as easy as possible to work with. Okay, these were all actionable. Every single person in the company could take that as direction and translate it into some of the things they do and ways of improving what they do. You want to avoid goal statements that are ambiguous and not really actionable, like, for example, provide the highest quality service. Okay, what's highest quality? You know, in my example there, the consistent and reliable was defining what high quality meant, and then of course we even went further to define it in other ways, and you know, how consistency related to truck breakdowns and you know, having errors in order taking on the phone and things like that. So you kind of broke it out, again, all to actionable kinds of areas that made sense to every single employee. At the end of the slide, you see I'm saying hold targeted improvement events which are driven by stretch goals. Now, up to now, I haven't talked about these events, but it's very common in Lean. We hold what are sometimes called Kaizen events, 3, 4, or 5 day events where you focus on a particular area, map out the process, spend some really focused time on understanding problems, waste, and then making improvements even as part of that event. And these can be great, and it's important that when they're driven by stretch goals. So part of empowerment is it's not just laying back and let everybody kind of go where they want. I mean, stretch goals say, hey, you need to go for this. It involves a challenge. So in terms of our 98% fulfillment rate, you know, we started out, we were in the 80s. And the first stretch goal was to get us into the low 90s. And that was not easy. But it was a goal, and we made it. And then we made another goal to get to the mid 90s, and then all the way to 98%. We actually stopped at 98 because that really set us apart from our competitors. And trying to go any higher, those of you who understand fulfillment know that it just becomes extremely expensive when you have very variable demand. So, but in terms of events, they can be very, very, very useful. But generally speaking, it's this everyday kind of improvement that we're talking about, where everybody's trained in waste, they're looking for it, they're improving it, you're having daily meetings. That's the real trust building. Events can be a problem, especially if you are in a low trust environment, okay? You want to be careful because those events can feel like they're exclusionary, and somebody comes out and announces, here's our new way of doing things, and you really didn't have an involvement in it. It's especially a problem if you've incorporated, as we do in, say, Lean Six Sigma, where you've got a good deal of data and statistics, which of course is very valuable, very useful, needs to be done in many, many cases. But in a low trust environment, you want to be careful. You don't want to appear to be trusting your data more than you're trusting your people. So that's the thing to avoid here when it comes to events. Visualizing the work. For trust building, you set up displays, signs, monitors, markings, other kinds of visual controls, all clearly visible and accessible to employees. If you're going to empower somebody, you have to give them the feedback, give them the information, not just to do their job, but to adapt to changing situations and to make improvements. You know, that this is under the category of not hiring people just to be cogs in a wheel that follow instructions. You're hiring them to be thinking human beings. In the events, we often develop value stream maps, process maps. Go ahead and post those afterwards so everybody can see it and be informed by it. But do avoid maps and displays that are just overly detailed and difficult to read and interpret. Identify waste. So employees should be explicitly identifying waste. For trust building, that should be part of the daily activity. It should become a habit. And of course, these are the 7 wastes as I've described them in my workshops. And as I said, I find this waste elimination to be just the most effective empowerment tool I've ever found. It's simple, people can understand it, it's very powerful. You know, those 7 wastes really capture the problem that needs to be addressed. And it's self-motivated, because when you eliminate waste, many times you're getting rid of these buggy situations that just annoy you, and people's stress levels go down. So there's this personal incentive to find and eliminate waste. It's just an amazing thing. But like anything else, it needs to be trained and then incorporated into that daily meeting, make it part of that, maybe include it in a suggestion system. The one thing you don't want to do is get into a blame and shame situation, and that often happens with in low trust cultures. So my 3rd ground rule is blame the process, not the person, which I respectfully borrowed from Deming, and but very important. Because if you have that kind of situation, looking around for waste can become very counterproductive. Improve the flow. So this is, as waste is eliminated, you're improving flow. Basically, flow is the lack of waste. Flow is work that is meeting those customer promises without interruption, with a minimal amount of resources. In terms of trust building, just an amazing, wonderful method is the 5S organizing effort. You can see an example there, before and after, of a work, a storage area that was organized using 5S, labels, colors, bins, and so forth. 5S is great because everyone can participate, and the result is stress reducing as well. I mean, you walk into that before storeroom and try to find something that it's just the anxiety of where is it, and it's annoying to wait. You go in a beautifully organized room like that, I have to believe it's a shot of oxytocin, okay? So it really is an important technique that everybody should be using. Employees do need some discretion in trying out different improvements, because that's, lean is about experimentation, and that does require some tolerance for failures, but small failures. You're doing this every day, you're talking about it in meetings, there's coaching going on. So this is part of the learning process, and you need to, failures are actually a good thing as long as you're learning from them. At the bottom there, warning. The best way to kill trust is to lay off employees as a result of a lean improvement situation. Never do it. You just can't do it. If you're going to empower people and ask them to improve their work and then turn around and lay them off, guess what the next time you ask they're going to say? They might not say it, but you're not going to get their help. I can guarantee you that. The last practice is standardized work. This is where the best current work procedures are recorded and communicated to employees. For trust building, just fantastic way of doing this is checklists. They are just so powerful and useful, and they just should be everywhere. And it does, beyond checklists, you can use other kinds of standard work guides, maps, diagrams, and so forth. But it's important that they be easy to understand. The key thing to know about standard work is that it's not meant to be a lockdown best practice, okay? It should be a flexible standard that actually invites employees to improve it. I had a partner firm that sent me some of their standard work documents, and I noticed they were like 3 or 4 years old. And I said, well, can you send me the more updated versions? And they go, no, that's still good. I said, really? So you haven't changed your standard work in 3 or 4 years? You may have a problem with empowerment. And they thought, and I think they did. So take a look at how the last time your standard work has been changed. But this is where the the control and the oversight comes in, because we all know what the right way to do things is, and that gives you the control. At the same time, you're allowing some flexibility so people can learn and improve. All right, so conclusions. Hopefully it's clear. Building and maintaining world-class trust will create a significant and sustainable competitive advantage. Sustainable is critical here. You no longer can sustain your advantage through products and services. Things change too quickly. The real competitive, sustainable advantage comes from your people. And that's where you get the real long-term advantages, and building this kind of trust will just lock that in. In terms of lean process improvement, if you pay attention to trust building, you're going to facilitate the change, make it work smoother. Your gains will be better. You're going to also improve employee satisfaction and workplace quality. And, for when your management recognizes and understands the importance of trust building, this just makes what you do in process improvement that much more valuable to the company. The way to build trust is to show respect, okay? And empowerment is a significant show of respect that builds trust by laying out what people should do rather than what people should think. Lean management builds trust because it's a system of empowerment where you share power while you're still maintaining oversight and risk management. You're managing risk because these are small incremental gains rather than trying to go for the big hit. And if anything, if I can leave you just with one kind of takeaway piece of advice, start thinking about the impact of trust on what you do. And I think you're going to find things will begin to improve. With that, these are my references. I want to thank you very much for your time and attention. Just point out, I do have my Essence of Lean book available on Amazon, and I do have my new book coming out next year called Leading with Trust, Practical Guide to Lean Empowerment. That trust assessment tool, I believe it's available for download, and or you can send me an email, or you can go to my website, which is essenceoflean.com, and it's there under Leading with Trust tab. So again, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And with that, I'll turn it over to Louisa for questions.
Thanks, Han. Thanks, David. We have a few questions in here. How do we rebuild trust when it is eroded, when it has been eroded? How do we rebuild trust when it has been eroded? Right.
So first of all, it can be rebuilt, because we saw that in the NUMMI situation and many others. But it's basically, step by step, begin to change what you do. And I find the two biggest early practices when you've lost trust, the two most important are the partnering and coaching. So if you can begin to have, daily meetings, get those stand-up meetings going, and you begin to have coaching where, the leaders are out at the place of work, working with employees, working with their people. That's the first step. There's no immediate quick way to do it, but it's just, again, through that interaction. And you also, in a real situation, I mean, there are some people who just can't adapt. They just don't trust others, and it doesn't matter who you are, they're not going to trust you. And after you've given somebody like that a chance, some people do need to be terminated from the organization. But it shouldn't have to be wholesale. You can't say, well, I got, half my workforce is not trustworthy. That's really not likely, because you can look at, again, at the NUMMI situation.
We have one more question here. Are the 8 lean management principles of David Hinds' own collection, or is there a reference he could share?
It is the way that, yes, I have described those 8 in my Essence of Lean book. But these map over to, a number of other key books that, Womack's book. There's a number of them that would relate to that. But it's really my attempt to bring together the literature and try to make it more focused especially for those that are not familiar with lean. So it's kind of an introduction, and yeah, I would definitely encourage you, if you're interested, to, start with my book, but there's plenty more to go. I'm really just trying to be a bridge here and not kind of give the full answer.
We have one more here. Can we get a copy of the waste identification guide that was referenced in this presentation?
Yes, if you give me send me an email, david@hindsandassociates.com. I can send you a layout of it. Right now, I'm redesigning it. But if you go ahead and send me an email, I'll be happy to send that to you. No, nothing proprietary here.
When going through a change in leadership personnel from an unhealthy leader to a healthier leader, what can that new leader do primarily to gain the trust of the team?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, and that's that, research has shown that the leader, especially the direct supervisor, has by far the most impact on trust in their group. That's a very key position. And so I would say the first thing to do is to be a good example. Do the right things. And begin. Be, as I said at the end. Just think about trust, and what is the impact of trust on the things that you do. And for example, sharing information. I mean, I think that's a great way to get started. If a new leader's coming in, if you can start with sharing some information that your team did not have before, that could really open their eyes. And be honest, be straightforward. If there were some issues before, without necessarily throwing other people under the bus, but it's important to. It's not just about delivering good news; it's delivering reality, and so be straightforward about reality. That's what I would suggest.
There's a question for the presentation to be shared with attendees. We have the presentation is in the handouts that can be downloaded and shared with anyone. The other question we have, in the essence of time, I'll just take one more. Can lean practices succeed in an organization that consistently values short-term cost more than long-term customer satisfaction? Is it necessary to address values before getting go ahead to implement practices?
Not entirely sure I understand the question. So it has to do with, what was it about short-term cost?
Can lean practices succeed in an organization that consistently values short-term cost more than long-term customer satisfaction?
Right.
Is it necessary to address values before getting go ahead to implement practices?
Yeah, if I understand that right, what about organizations where they're really after short-term profit, not looking to build long-term relationships with their customers, I guess. And I know there are some organizations where maybe you don't have repeated exposure to the customers, but what we're talking about here is your relationship with your employees. So even in a situation where, maybe you don't have regular customer relationships, the key thing here is building that within the organization. So absolutely, now where it can be difficult is where you have transitory employees, like a lot of the fast food industry is just kind of designed for people that roll through. That's more of a challenge, so you do have to realize that this does depend on some level of stability, within the workforce and the ability for them to build a relationship with the company. If it really not part of the industry, then you have less of a chance of, not that it won't work, but less of a chance.
David, all our attendees have complimented on your excellent presentation. And I would like to thank David Hinds on behalf of all attendees and ASQ Lean Enterprise Division team for taking his time out to share his real-time application and experience with us. These are some very important and interesting information that we can apply to any business or organization. As I said earlier, David Hines' presentation is now recorded and will be posted on the ASQ Lean Enterprise Division YouTube channel later this week. I want to remind you that January 2020 topic is Understanding Toyota Kata, and the presenter is Leanne Schielmeyer. Thanks to everyone for participating in today's webinar. Have a great day.